So, first of all, please ensure that your microphone and video are turned off. And please turn your microphone and video on only if you are speaking. Please be aware that this session is recorded. And now you should all know how to raise the hand function in the bottom middle of the screen if you absolutely need to get our attention during the sessions. We will respond in chat. Please use the chat function to ask any questions, and please do ask questions in the chat or for any comments you may have. Be patient with us. We will ensure your questions are answered. If you have any technical problems, you can try logging out of Zoom and logging back in. So today I'd like to introduce Rebecca Gilman. Now in the UK, she is a nurse, and so nurses are called sisters. Sister Rebecca Gilman, but I think that she probably goes by Rebecca Gilman. She is a lupus research clinical nurse specialist at University of Birmingham. And honestly, she is exactly what all of us wish we had in all our countries, a lupus nurse. And I love this photo of her because it's probably what she's doing. She's on the phone answering questions for people who have questions about their lupus treatment or whatever. She's active at the Birmingham City Hospital Lupus Unit, which has been elected or nominated a Lupus UK Centre of Excellence since 2005. And that's Lupus UK that gives them this award. And it's headed up by Professor Caroline Gordon. Rebecca works closely with Lupus UK on various projects, most recently on addressing the issues obtaining hydroxychloroquine tablets for lupus patients. And I'm really sorry about why that was necessary. It has something to do with my American background. I'd like to tell you that this session is pre-recorded because that way it will have subtitles. We're able to add subtitles. However, Rebecca Gilman will join us for the question and answer session. That's why I say, please do pose your questions in the chat. So, and now we have a few quizzes. So if we could launch the quizzes, thank you. Do you see the quizzes? Could you start answering the quiz? And I see there's 18 people connected. So.
And only 15 can answer the questions because the other are co-hosts, so they can see but not answer.
Okay. Oh dear. Yeah.
So a few more, please. And obviously there are a couple, I mean, I've seen Mariana joined us from industry, so obviously.
Yeah, okay.
Not applicable.
Okay.
So.
Should we say that, well, that's a little bit, yeah, that's very telling. I've reduced my social life a bit, or I've become almost a hermit. And I'm really sorry to hear that from some people. No one said it hasn't had an impact. Could have developed deeper relationships with some friends. I think that should have been a multiple question, multiple response. Perhaps some people would have answered that one. And I'm more active now, especially because of my lupus group contacts. No one answered that either. Okay, next quiz, please. Oh, do I share the results?
No,
Okay.
it was shared. So the quiz
Okay.
is launched.
Quiz 2. Lupus has had an impact on my work life. You just have one answer. I think this might go in the same direction. Need a few more. Only half of the people have answered. I hope it's not too complicated.
So the quiz is stopped, and so you can comment. There are no more answers coming up.
Okay, no more answers then. Okay, so it's only one person is being able to continue as before. So most people have either had to go part-time or stop work altogether, which is a shame. Okay, thanks. Could someone make sure they're reading the chat? Thanks. I hope there's not a problem with the quizzes. Thank you for your answers on that. Unfortunate, but perhaps to be expected. So can we have quiz 3? Lupus has an impact on my family life. And this is a multiple choice. So if you could have a look, I've cut off most of my family contacts. I could not continue without the support of my family. The relationship with my family hasn't changed. I've developed stronger relationships with some of my family and less with others. My family is actively involved in my lupus treatment, but also my lupus activities. More people. We need about 2 or 3 more answers. Gosh. Yep. Excellent. So it's to be expected. It'd be a shame to cut off most of my family contacts. That's had to happen with some. And some people, the family is actively involved in lupus treatment, but also all the lupus activities. Some of them have developed stronger relationships within some of their family and less with others. Relationship with my family hasn't changed. And I could not continue without the support of my family is neck and neck with the relationship with my family hasn't changed. Thank you very much for that. It's very telling. Okay, and then the last quiz question, please. This one is the one that we laughed about yesterday, but lupus has had an impact on my romantic life. And this one is quite a serious question, especially for younger people. I'm afraid to engage in any new romantic relationships because of having lupus. I tried to hide my disease from any new romantic interest. My partner is understanding and supports me 100%. I have withdrawn from my partner. I have become reckless in my romantic life because I feel life is short. This is an anonymous quiz. We can't see who's answering. Yeah, so if you want to answer the last one about being reckless in your romantic life, you can answer it. We don't know who's answering these. Maybe we have 1 or 2 more replies.
I guess there might be people that don't find themselves in all the options, so that's fine if you don't answer. There might be other things.
Yeah. Or, yeah.
Well,
okay, well, I'm very happy to say that no one has withdrawn from their partner if they have a partner. So, yeah, afraid to engage in any new romantic relationships because of lupus, and I try to hide my disease from any new romantic interest. Are the 2 top, which is sad but true, and I think that's exactly what we might expect, and it's a shame. I think that's all about communication. And I've become reckless in my romantic life because life is short. And my partner's understanding, that's 2 people out of 9. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. And we will save those results, as I said, anonymous. Okay, and then can we get rid of the poll? Right, and now we are going to start the video. Thanks very much.
Hello, thank you Lupus Europe for asking me to present and speak with you this afternoon. My name's Rebecca Gilman. I'm a lupus-specific clinical nurse specialist and research nurse in Birmingham in the UK. What this means is that I work with an adult service SARD team in an NHS hospital.
So, Anna, what about this?
So SARD stands for Systemic Autorheumatic Disease Conditions, and the NHS is the national free at point of care service available to all who are eligible in the UK. We care for many conditions, but I work specifically with lupus patients and have done so for over 10 years now. As well as being dual competent for research and for the CNS nursing roles, I've had the privilege of working with many lupus patients. People speak to me about anything and everything. I try hard to listen, provide information and research opportunities, and to give them relevant, balanced information to support their decision, whatever that may be. I've been asked to speak with you today about better balance of health when you have lupus within social and work lives. So SLE is an autoimmune system condition. Lupus is very much more common in women than men, and the long-term condition presents itself and shows when the immune system produces too many specific blood proteins, antibodies, due to deficiencies in cellular waste product removal, how cells clear things up. These antibodies can directly or indirectly affect most parts of the body and by causing inflammation. When treated early enough, this inflammation settles down, the organs recover, and long-lasting damage is prevented or at least minimised. As we're at a Lupus Europe conference, I'm sure you've had excellent speakers expanding this for you already. I'm not going to go into this in much more detail now. That's not the focus of what we're talking about this afternoon. But from the 2014 Lupus UK patient questionnaire, which was published in 2018, so a bit of a delay there, but the most recent thing I could come across, the most significant areas for patients are pain, joint swelling and fatigue. I'm sure this is not a surprise to you, and it certainly wasn't to me. It's these aspects that people most want advice about, and this is what we will look at today with some further practical advice. We'll be focusing on top tips and tricks that you might try, or that somebody that you know and love with lupus has. And I've based this on a few resources and many conversations with people with lupus. I haven't referenced them today, so if you want to come back to me by email through the organisation, through Lupus Europe, and want to ask for links and evidence, I can happily provide that for you. There'll be some ideas that you've heard of, some you've even tried, but hopefully there'll be a couple of different things to kind of approach things maybe a little differently to get an improvement. So, excuse me reading this, and I've got my script behind the camera, that's why I keep looking up to it just to prompt me. There are 86,400 seconds, 1,440 minutes and 24 hours in each day. We each get those. We're really fortunate. On repeat every single day, whether we've got lupus, whether we haven't, whether we have other long-lasting health conditions or whether we don't. The beautiful picture on the left is of the University of Birmingham roof line on the main campus as a day breaks. It's not mine. It is a wonderful shot. What we don't get in all those hours, minutes and seconds, and some of them can be very long, is we don't get similar energy levels each day. Some days we wake ready to get the day started, ready to make the most of each and every hour. Some days not, definitely not. Some days we need more energy than others. They're more physically and mentally draining. And some of us, and on some days, are juggling more than others. Our mental load is greater. So some are juggling households, businesses, work, partner, children, family, caring responsibilities, shifts or multiple activities. The list can be really long. The balance can be tricky. Some of us have more resources available to help us with these. A little bit like being at a buffet, you can balance far more on a ceramic sturdy plate than on one of those floppy paper plates. With more resources available, more help and tactics to use, more can be coped with and taken on. A commonly repeated metaphor that I was introduced to very early on in my time within the lupus department was referring to these energy units as spoons. Every action uses up some energy, and some more swiftly than others. Some use up more spoons than others. There's a wonderful metaphor that has been put onto Wikipedia now by Christine Miserandio, apologies for pronunciation, in 2003, referred to as the spoon theory. If you've not come across it, do look it up. It's a useful, helpful analogy. For all of us, it can be tricky to appreciate what a single unit of energy is, what a spoon unit is. And in some ways, it doesn't matter whether we are using exactly the same or not. The thing to remember is that that unit can vary from day to day for each of us. And things on some days can take a single unit, and some can take, on the next day, the same activity can take 2 or 3. From what my lupus patients describe, it's the unpredictability of that flux that can be the hardest and most frustrating symptom to adjust to. especially as that fatigue and those energy levels are just invisible. With more or less energy and fatigue, people don't look any more or less well or unwell. There is no outer change. The important things to remember is that energy levels are not boundless. Prioritisation becomes so important. True prioritisation rather than wistful. Planning can make a real difference. And even just knowing this can start to tip balances back into a more manageable direction. I've really wanted to approach this talk today, where possible, from common ground. And this is why I've chosen the order of approach that I have. So for the next part, we're going to look at social life first. We're all social beings, and even those of us who seek out time by ourselves in preference to time with others are part of society, of a social setup. There really are common areas of crossover. We've all got areas of talent, ability, interest. There are things in contrast that we don't like or even increase our stress levels. Those are important too. We have natural differences of energy levels and energy cycles. Again, maybe not in the worst point of a flare where only sleep will do, but in general, you will find that you have a naturally higher energy level at a regular point. For some people, that's first thing, mid-morning, for some after lunch. And for some, it's as the rest of your friends and family are going to bed. All are quite usual. The challenge is mapping when you've got natural energy to activities that you enjoy and want to spend time on. We also need to reduce stress levels where possible. Removing stress will never be a complete possibility. We'll never get rid of it entirely. And it does have a useful, helpful place in keeping us healthy. But too much is also not good for us. I think the other thing worth noting at this point is that sometimes there's a grieving process that we need to go through when we've had a significant diagnosis, when we've been diagnosed with lupus. People talk about hopes and dreams that might have had to have been paused, timescales changed. Sometimes people manage to return to them, sometimes they don't. But in the early stages, it feels like everything gets turned on its head. While it's not directly linked to a person, we're not grieving an actual person, some people do grieve the person they thought they would become and they were about to be, and they grieve that very deeply. As with any other grief, there is no right or wrong way to do it. There's no timescale either. But within this context, it is important to keep things progressing forwards. And sometimes we need our family and friends to take us gently along for a while we find our bearings again. Right, I'm just going to mention the spoon theory again, and this is where it really starts to come into its own. Some days, I know with lupus patients, even myself without lupus, some days are a 4-spoon day if you are lucky. And getting up, having a shower, getting dry and dressed back into pyjamas before going back to bed really is the limit. Other days, we're more fortunate. The going is good, the weather's kind, spending time with people that you've planned to do can happen as you set up. There's a couple of important links between these two things. Having family and friends around us that can genuinely support you and that you can be completely real with is very important. Now, I'm not saying that you will get to that depth of relationship with all your family and friends, but finding allies, finding your tribe, as is currently phrased, is so important. They will be able to offer you support and probably practical help, though this may not come packaged as we wish each time. Being able to say, I'm sorry I can't, or I've got energy for one thing today but not the other, and what you're suggesting is not it, is really important. Whilst finding allies and supporters is really important, it's equally as important that we recognise some people are just unlikely to understand. Sometimes we've approached that difficult conversation that we were feeling very vulnerable about, and we don't get the reply back that feels supportive. By all means, be polite to everybody. There's no need for unkindness, but there is no need to worry about stating what you need and politely declining something because you need to use your energy elsewhere. As well as having support, developing and maintaining independence is also important. Doing what is possible ourselves is important for the physical level, but also our mental well-being. Knowing when to compromise is likely to become your superpower with all of this, and developing flexibility to situations your secret weapon. Lupus patients certainly are invaluable in finding extra resources. Sometimes with social life we set up expectations, especially in these wonderfully interlinked social media fueled worlds that we now live in. It really is important to keep perspective. What people put onto their social media is very likely to be their showreel, the edited highlights. All of us have huge value, and this is not based on what we get to do. Gaining self-peace is a real art, but it is well worth pursuing. There's plenty, all of us, add to each day. We know how important the well-timed text can be. So when you're able, in reply, be the friend, the aunt, the uncle, the person in contact who is genuinely interested. Take photos, share your angle, your perspective, the change of sunlight patterns through the year in your room. Do find your tribe. Use social media positively. Link with people anywhere without having to travel, without the distance mattering. Find things that interest you. Do get involved from your chair or your bed, even when you haven't got the energy to do it in person or you prefer to stay away. Things like being creative, whether that's art, dialogue, creative writing, commenting and getting involved with discussion on favourite films or TV series, writing a novel, that memoir of your aunt or your granddad or yourself. They say every one of us has got a book inside us. Lupus really fluctuates. It brings many big challenges and frustrations, but it does also allow when we let it for different opportunities. Now, family life wasn't what I was asked to speak about specifically, but families come in all sorts of shapes and sizes like people. Some have children within them, some don't. I'm going to talk about having kids, as this is what I do get approached about more than people's life decisions about who to partner with. And there's always a place to encourage safe sex practices, and this regularly is a topic of discussion within appointments. It's one I usually guide people to their family doctor for, as this is not my niche area. But the one principle I do say to people is that in new relationships, condoms are absolutely the place to go to until you're settled and definitely into a stable relationship. There are a selection of contraceptives available, both for safe sex and to help control a woman's menstrual cycle and prevent pregnancy. They can also be used potentially to help space pregnancies and sibling children. Now, 25 to 30 years ago, the medical advice to those with lupus was don't have children. And to those maybe diagnosed a bit later on in life who already had a child or children, it was don't have any more. I am so glad that we are definitely at a point where it's now an individual's choice. We strongly advocate planning pregnancies to a time when lupus is quiet, and certainly not within a flare. This is both for the pending mother's well-being and also for the baby's best outcome. Because discussing pregnancy is usually so important, we usually cover it within the first appointment on meeting a new patient. Within British culture, this can come across as quite forward, but of course timing is necessary. If you don't know that the best time to be pregnant is when your lupus is quiet and it's more of a what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe a controversial topic of conversation that you wouldn't naturally bring up with a stranger, such as a practitioner that you're meeting for the first time, you wouldn't then know to try to delay pregnancy where possible. I'm not going to talk about specific medications today, but it is very important to keep in mind that there are some lupus meds which must be avoided in pregnancy for both the mum and baby's health. But equally, there are some that very much improve pregnancy outcome, so are definitely best continued right through the pregnancy. We do frequently get phone calls from patients, although this is beginning to change, from well-meaning pharmacists and chemists who have stopped access to particular medications for an expectant mother because they worry about the baby's health and outcome. And we do need to kind of stress those points quite carefully. So do be careful where you get advice from. I'm not for a minute suggesting people mean ill from this, but sometimes people's knowledge is a little bit out of date. So work life. Many people with lupus are well enough to work, indeed need to work to support themselves and others. It can be hard and challenging to find a job role that fits with a fluctuating condition, but it certainly can be possible. We've got many people in clinic who have a real range of jobs, careers and roles. We've got people who are authors, cleaners, police officers, teachers, computer games programmers, accountants, ceramicists, calligraphy artists. There really is all manner of jobs and careers, and it highlights the talent and resourcefulness of people. We also have people in clinic who don't work. They are no less resourceful and talented. Work just doesn't fit for them for now. It can be really helpful to look at the reasons for why people want to work and taking time outside of a clinic appointment to do that and take your time to go through it. But going with your interests, your talents and abilities is often the way to pursue work. An element of pragmatism is also helpful, and starting a new career when you're having a large flare is always going to be a difficult challenge. When you're within a role, there is much that can be looked at to tailor it to you as an individual. Again, finding work allies is really important. Not everyone will and can understand the lupus condition, but in this circumstance, this isn't what you need. You don't need everybody to know about your personal medical background. You just need a few key individuals. What we suggest is people have a careful, quiet, often private conversation with their manager. Now, this is exactly what managers should be trained in, because they're there to support the individual to do their individual work role. Approaching these conversations and interactions professionally should be a given, but it really does make a difference. So if you're able to go in with a clear idea of what you're asking about or what you need, and where possible, a possible solution that you'd like to be explored, this can really help. It might be that you need to change your hours slightly, that you start or end your work at a different time to your colleagues, but you still do the same number of hours for your contract. It might be that provision of an hour's unpaid lunch break or longer, rather than a shorter 20 or 30 minutes as is common in the UK, so that you can take your time over a break and even possibly nap on days where that's needed, that will make the difference. Or it could be that you prefer that your break is divided into two, so that your work time is in 3 blocks. Or it could be that you need a quiet space for breaks away from colleagues so that you can recharge better. Some people find breaking up tasks helpful and changing more readily. In some roles, you might not be able to just step away to change your task and switch when you choose. So having an identified colleague that you can approach in the moment and switch with might be the answer. When in a new role or job, these requests can be misunderstood because you're not known. So the manner of approach really is helpful. you might need to go more cautiously at the very start of job placements with these conversations. It shouldn't be needed, but reassurance to your manager that you are here to do the job, and then following that up with your work ethic can really help. Anyone can ask for adjustment for any reason. Managers are used to requests. Doesn't mean that they will automatically be granted. It is worth stating that. Where managers are less used to requests, giving a medical reason behind it can really help. So it can be helpful to have a formal open letter, to whom it might concern type letter from your healthcare practitioner, that there is a clear reason why adjustments are being requested. In the UK, there is a national formal organisation called Access to Work that can be approached for funding supporting to individuals for either with equipment or adjustments that enable them to stay in work. So things like changing computer equipment or chairs, or I know of somebody that's used the funding to enable taxis so that whilst he is needed at work at a particular time, he doesn't have to deal with the heavy commuter traffic that was just draining him. Access to work can make a real difference to a company being able to fund what are sensible, reasonable adjustments, but that otherwise might be too costly. So much of life for so many of us involves interacting with a computer. So it may be, as I've mentioned, that you might need additional equipment such as a vertical mouse, the picture on the left, or an ergonomic, on the right, or an ergonomic keyboard pictured on the right. It might be that you need a setting for a particular chair that fits and supports you appropriately, or it might be that you need a wheel box or trolley for moving equipment around. Context is everything. And these things can be easier to arrange in larger organisations who might have dedicated support departments or colleagues. But whilst it might be harder within smaller companies, it's also often clearer to your manager that a change will help. Compromise and open conversations, as open as you're happy to give, really do help. Attitudes are rightly changing, and it is far more accepted that people can have abilities and disabilities, both of which cannot be obvious. It is far from progress, but I certainly welcome the progress. So in conclusion, lupus really can wax and wane, but with the right treatment, it very much can become quiescent. And for lupus ladies, often the menopause is a welcome point when hormones settle and lupus settles too. Do what you can to look after yourself. Optimise your options, even with the challenges and the difficulties that you may be having. Find your allies. Don't assume that everybody will be supportive, but just move on from them. If you wish to have children, it's absolutely an option, but it does need to be as planned as well as possible. If you have the option to work, tailor it to you and your abilities as much as possible. Compromise and flexibility become essential attributes, especially in the face of frustration. We're each individuals with our own likes and dislikes and wishes. Diagnosis doesn't change that. Go with them where you can.
Right. Thank you very much. I think, okay, so we are now, we now have Rebecca Gilman with us, and it would be nice if, and she is ready to answer questions. Hello.
Hi, good to be here.
There,
Thanks
I've
for having
opened up
me.
my screen. There we go. And very nice of you to come on a Sunday afternoon.
Oh, you're very welcome.
We have a number of people here, and we've spent the last day and a half hearing about the medicine and the treatments and the new drugs and all that sort of thing, and the illness itself or the disease itself. And many of the questions are really around social life and family life and work life. And so we've had some questions, and I will, so one of the questions that we've had, and so you've been kind enough to come and be with us today, Sunday. And like I said earlier, that in the last session we just had, everyone said that they wish that they had, well, everyone, many people, Italy, they have lupus nurses. UK, they have lupus nurses, but many places don't, and they wish they had them. So one of the questions that was posed was, many people with lupus also face depression, which also has an impact on social life. What do you advise them to do?
Well, depression is an illness in its own right. And so working out what the source and the cause of that depression is really important. People with lupus can have depression sort of concurrently with their lupus, and it's not necessarily a reaction to the lupus, but it often is. So if there's another reason for that, it's well worth getting that approached and looked at. Depression is also treatable. We wouldn't for a moment suggest that diabetics only sorted out their diet and just pulled themselves together and got on with it. You go and seek appropriate medical support, as well as looking at what we could do as individuals to sort that out. So for us in clinic, we very much look at holistic treatment, as we do for the lupus. So sometimes that involves going to see the family doctor, the GP, to go and get some further treatment. Sometimes it involves pointing people in the right direction of some talking therapies. And sometimes it's clear that actually the depression is a reaction to lupus and something that's very, very tricky at that point. So potentially a difficult personal relationship or a difficult work setup, and sometimes encouraging people through to change that other circumstance can be part of the solution.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's another holistic approach again. That's exactly what we're looking for. We have another question that, as a lupus nurse, what do you experience as being the things people have most difficulties to talk with the doctor? Do people have trouble talking with it? What are the most difficult things to address with their doctor?
I work within the UK, and I don't know whether this is just UK centric and a cultural reaction for a UK population. But things that people find tricky to talk about tend to be the things that we find tricky to talk about in the sort of general social setup. So things about sex, about family, things about mental health. It's the more taboo subjects. And very often, but not always, very often as a nurse, I get a very different conversation with my patients than they do with the medic. We're very fortunate that with some of our clinics, we have parallel holistic clinics. So the patient will see me and they will see a doctor. So we're seeing them practically at the same time point, maybe half an hour apart. The conversation that I will have with patients can be incredibly different to what they choose to bring to talk to the doctor. So people tend to open up more to me and talk about the sex, the difficult relationships, the ulceration that they can't get settled, the ongoing thrush that they wish wouldn't be there, and mental health conditions that they're not quite understanding. Is this linked to their lupus? Is it something separate? Could it be lupus? Is it not?
That's it's quite interesting. We did have a question about sex, whether that was a cause of fatigue, whether it was a good idea to have sex at night or not. And the reply was just kind of laughter. So,
oh no,
because it was embarrassing.
Levels. It's the same as anything else. Unfortunately, if you've got lupus, it's like anything else that takes energy. Intimacy is so important, and finding other ways to be intimate is really, really key. But finding a point where you've got enough energy to have sex and you can build the romance in and still have a very gorgeous moment. But sometimes you have to plan it. And sometimes that means, picking a moment if you've got children when they're off at school and the house is quiet, but that you're both at home and it's the middle of the day, because that works for energy levels, that's what you go with.
Well,
I mean,
you're the person we should have asked.
we don't know about that.
Well, no, that's an excellent answer.
Almost anything.
Yeah, well, they're lovely. It's just lovely. So do you sometimes, another question, do you sometimes also consult with husbands or partners?
Not directly. It's very much in the patient's decision. So my relationship is with the patient. If they choose to bring anybody else into their appointment, they are always welcome. That's the patient's choice and decision. So whether that's a partner, whether it's a husband, wife, whether it's a family member, or whether it's somebody completely unrelated and a very supportive friend, I don't mind who else is in that room, but my relationship is with the patient. I will always answer questions from the other person in the room, but always asking the patient first, is that okay? Is that okay? And you can usually tell from body language when you're in the same space. We've moved on to primarily telephone consultation at the moment, so we don't get the obvious other person in the room. So it's not quite so easy to work out if there are questions from somebody else that's concerned.
All right, and a follow-on, there's a different question, but a follow-on that is that men with lupus, do they raise different questions than women with lupus?
They tend to be a bit more straight down the line with their questions. They want factual replies about things. They tend to ask just in a different way. What they need information on tends to actually be the same, but the approach is different. Okay,
thanks for that. And it was a man who asked.
It's good to hear their opinion and see what see what other people say.
And we have a question, Claudia. How to manage brain fog in the work life and also in social life? Sometimes I am forgetting people I have met. They talk to me and I have no idea who they are. Also, sometimes mixing the tasks at work or forgetting some of them is a problem as well. And I'll just say this is a young woman who's asking you. She's in her late 20s, because I recognize that, and I'm in my 60s, but she's in her late 20s. Yeah.
Sometimes there can be an element of age to this. Sorry, my doorbell's just gone. I shall ignore that for the moment. So brain fog, finding your own ways through brain fog is really important, because it affects different people in different ways. It is the same condition, but if you are in human resources and you're meeting a huge number of people every day, but you're not going to meet them again in the future, forgetting somebody's name will have a different layer to somebody that teaches primary school children or kindergarten children, where you're going to need to know what those children's names are. So I think the solutions can be a bit different. Naming brain fog for what it is, I think, is really useful. Pretending it's not there doesn't help anybody. And alerting colleagues so that they can then be supportive to you is also really key. So it might be that at meet and greets, using names again as an example, and meeting people, there's a colleague who can really flag up the key people that you need to be alert to, and you focus on a few key names rather than trying to remember everybody's name. There might be different approaches through it.
Mm-hmm. And that's lovely. That's
I don't know whether I've really answered the question. Does that kind of answer it? Maybe the lady will come back to us, and
maybe she'll come back to us.
Maybe she'll tell me.
No, but that's something that is absolutely very common. Something that a lot of people mention. Very common.
It is also very confusing, because sometimes people talk to me and they know my story, my family, they ask me questions, and I'm like following the conversation, and then I'm thinking, who was that? So it can be quite confusing.
Well, if you have a relationship, kind of a rapport with that person, being quite frank with them and saying, I'm really sorry, we've clearly met before and I'm so sorry, I just don't remember you. Can you just remind me of your name, and kind of pick up that way, being quite frank with people, and again in a professional, formal way, can help. It might be one way through it.
Thank you. There's a question of how do you approach patients who are in total grief because of the disability?
I think it's important to be in the moment with them. So we don't see lupus as a devastating diagnosis. So it can take a while for the patient to come to that point. And so you can't hurry that and you can't force it. But encouraging people through and putting them in touch with, we're very, very fortunate to have a wonderful organisation called Lupus UK, and putting people in touch with charity contacts so that they can be in touch with peers, either through social media or telephone contact, however they choose to do it, can be one way of bringing people through. But gently supporting people in their appointments to say, actually, you know, things will settle. We will get to a different point. And we are able to say that actually diagnosis is usually the lupus patient's worst point. Things usually improve really quite well from that point on, but the key is absolutely getting the lupus under control. It doesn't need to be a devastating diagnosis, and so bringing a different perspective to the person can be one way through that.
Thank you. A very positive spin on it. That's great. And it seems to be borne out too by the people that we have here who, once they're diagnosed, they just then, things hopefully get better. Usually often can get a bit better.
Yeah, lupus can be a little bit like ice skating, in that you can't do things quickly or suddenly. It's the long game, and keeping that perspective can be really, really tricky when actually maybe you're in your 20s and you've just been diagnosed, and maybe you've got a new baby, and there's a lot of things happening that you want to just get on with and enjoy your life, and suddenly you need to change pace. That can be really tricky, but bringing a different perspective for a longer game and taking it slower and a bit more gently can be one way through it.
Then a question, this is a question I'm asking actually. Do you have many patients who use or want to use alternative treatments? A lot of talk about CBD oil, and perhaps there's different types of medication or even physical treatments.
We do. We have a lot of people who want to explore other practices. What we have to say is that none of that is researched to be used in conjunction with more traditional Western medicine, and so we just don't know what the outcome will be. We don't know how the interactions will be, and we don't have the strong scientific base to say what's going to be safe and what's not going to be safe. What I also do say within that is that we're talking adults to adults. I work within an adult service. We very rarely see anybody under 18. We will sometimes see 16 and 17-year-olds, but that's rare. So we're dealing with an adult group of patients. I want to work with people as equals. So if you want to go and try that, what I want to do is provide you with relevant information so that you can make an informed choice. If people want to choose to go off and do that, absolutely. And some people do find these things helpful, but we just don't have the scientific basis to be able to thoroughly recommend a lot of the alternative practices.
That's really good. That's a very sensible and yes, coherent answer, I'd say. You know, there's been another question, and I'll just ask this, that we've asked this of several doctors, or two of the doctors, and we've had alternative answers. So now you're going to be the kingmaker. We're looking at, because one of the main problems that is seen by lupus patients is fatigue, and profound fatigue. And we're wondering if there's any way to test for it. So there would be a scientific way to say, yes, she's this person is fatigued, and here's the scientific proof to show it, because a lot of time fatigue gets sort of blown off as depression, or it's something else, and a lot of people feel that they're not taken seriously in their fatigue. And one doctor said there was no, nothing yet, and another doctor seemed to suggest that there was a way of sort of proving that there was fatigue was due to lupus and not just having a bad day. Do you have any thoughts on that?
We've done some work with patient-reported outcomes, but as far as I'm aware, we don't have a scientific tool that I'm alerted to that we can use to prove fatigue due to lupus or due to anything else. But work certainly is going on within that sphere.
Okay, that's something everyone's very keen on, I think, because
yeah, absolutely, it's needed. It's much needed.
Yeah. So, are there any other questions? I'm asking the group now, because if not, at this point, we're planning on moving to workshops where we have 2 groups, I think, and we have questions. And Rebecca, it would be kind of nice if you would join us in one of the breakout rooms. Would you mind doing that?
Yeah, no, that'd be great.
Workshop? Okay. So now there's some secret little workers behind my screen somewhere who are going to move us to breakout rooms.